How's it going, everybody? I'm your host, Stu Coughlin, and welcome to Sox on 35th podcast, a bit of an emergency podcast covering your Chicago White Sox. Quick shout out to SeatGeek. It's an emergency podcast, but we got to definitely still take care of the people who take care of us. SeatGeek, no brainer. Don't pay season tickets. Don't pay face value. Like go see the sporting events you want. You know, Jonathan Toews just came back to the United Center. It was absolutely dynamite. If you would have paid list price for that, good Lord, God bless you. But there's just no way that a lot of people want to be able to do that, and that's what SeatGeek's for. Use code SOX on 35th for $20 off your first purchase. I'm joined by the man himself, Nik Gaur. How we doing, buddy? Obviously, just kind of leading you right in. The Luis Robert trade finally happened.
Yeah, I mean, I'm doing well, and obviously it was a bit of a surprise to finally see that after basically 2 years of constant rumors. But yeah, my first thoughts actually were pretty similar. I was actually kind of proud of White Sox Twitter or the fan base, whatever you want to call it, because I wasn't able to go on any sort of like on the internet basically for 2 hours until after the trade happened. I saw it immediately, but then I was playing tennis basically. But I thought people were going to be really happy. I thought it was going to be like, wow, we got rid of him. Like, this is great. But people were more like, okay, like this return, and I know you might disagree, so we'll get to that. But like, okay, this return is underwhelming, or like, okay, like it's nothing to get too excited about, is the most common take I saw. And, maybe we'll reallocate the 20 million, maybe we won't. It kind of just depends on what they do with the money. But I tend to agree more with that camp in terms of the return being like fine. Like Acuña, he's at least something, right? It's like it's better than getting two lottery ticket A ball pitchers, which is basically the second guy they got. But I do have, concerns over his viability as a long term regular player. I think he could be a weapon off the bench with his speed, I think, in a worst case scenario, because he's versatile defensively and he seems to play good defense, at least on the infield. But anything more than that, I think would be a great outcome. I just don't know how realistic it is. But that's where I want to hear your thoughts, because I know that you've been more of an Acuna fan over the years, so I'm sure it's a different feeling for you.
Yeah, I mean, Luisangel Acuña has been kind of like a wish list prospect for me for a long time. I'm not going to sit here and just say that this is like the best trade package in the world. It just kind of happened to turn into a trade package that included a guy that I liked and a guy that I never thought the White Sox would actually go after, because the White Sox typically do the exact opposite of what I want them to do. So overall, I'm kind of just relieved, I guess, just initial thoughts. Cause, as you said, like this has been an ongoing story for like 2 years now. And, probably even a little bit longer than that. But after Luis had his one real breakout year, it kind of quieted the storm a little bit. And it was like, okay, let's build around him rather than trade him type thing. And obviously, the last 2 years of Luis Robert came, there was flashes. I think we've covered it more than enough on the podcast over the time we've been doing these, about like getting excited about him, coming back down to earth, seeing that maybe, that player's probably still in there, but either he's not motivated or his body's just not agreeing with him. And it's kind of like the last big piece of the last regime. I think White Sox Dave actually said it best on Twitter, I believe it was today, when he said that like this was like the last big piece of the Rick Hahn era that we finally got off the team. And it's, I don't know. It hasn't totally sunk in, because I don't think it'll fully sink in until we see these guys go to spring training. We really realize Luis Robert isn't there. But as far as like the excitement or the, pitfalls of a disappointing trade, I'm not really feeling either side of it. I'm very just like, we got a prospect I want, prospect who I'm very high on, and a prospect I'm going to talk about a little bit on this episode. But at the same time, like, I'm kind of just glad that we didn't get nothing, because there was a very real possibility that the White Sox weren't going to even pick up his option, and then he was going to be free on the market. And the fact that, whether we like it or not, the way the White Sox financially run this team, the fact that the Mets were able to take all of that, all of his contract, really, that bodes well for us. It's going to depend on where that money's spent, obviously, and that's a conversation for another day because obviously we haven't been, besides Kenny getting it, always getting his guy. We haven't necessarily been the people to bring in the high marquee free agents, but um, overall, I think it's a net positive. It's going to take people who are huge fans of Luis Robert to kind of adjust to it for a little bit, but I'm not like, I'm not offended. I'm not over the moon excited. I'm just kind of glad it's over.
Yeah, yeah, that's fair. I mean, especially I think given how long this kind of dragged on, I think everyone in hindsight would say that sure, the White Sox should have traded him after the 2023 season when he was at peak value. But at the time, he was coming off like, what, 38 home runs, like great defense, a lot of stolen bases. He was healthy. Like that was peak Luis Robert. I don't even think at that time that's like trading 3 years of a elite center fielder. I don't even know if you can get a
Uh,
package that actually
time
equals
is
that
moving
value.
pretty
You would have
fast
to
on
take
it.
right. Like you would have to take a little bit of a haircut. I think in a perfect world, he repeated that performance in 24 and then you trade, 2 years of him for, quite the package. But no one really, I mean, maybe not nobody, most people didn't think he would be so injured and or mediocre the last couple of years. And that's kind of what made it difficult. So it's one of those things where, a lot of people I've seen are criticizing Getz a little bit for holding on to him for so long for this package. But as somebody who has been harsh on Getz overall, I actually don't think he did anything wrong here because I would think it would have been in the moment, it would have been worse to trade him after 2023 for like, a top 40 prospect and a couple other pieces, which is probably what you would have gotten because teams just don't trade those top five, top 10 guys like they used to anymore, at least not regularly. So it's kind of a lose lose situation. But like you said, I'm not thrilled with it, but it's like at least we got something, right? So there's the weight is off Chris gets his shoulders, I guess.
Yeah, and even following like his one, like the one breakout season in 23, there really wasn't a good enough spurt anywhere in there that could have justified getting a great return. And like it felt like all of baseball kind of leveraged that against the White Sox. Anybody that was interested in him used it against us, where it's like, so one, he's injury prone, and two, we kind of have this issue with we have not seen him put it all together for more than one season. And I'm glad you brought up like the point of what the reaction would be had we traded him after 2023, because I feel like there would have been freaking riots in the street about it. People would have been very upset about it, way more upset than they are right now about it, because it would have felt like us like finally getting like to see one of our highly touted prospects finally develop into this star, and then we just ship him away. You know what I mean? It would have been like it would have been like trading Yoel Moncada after his breakout season. You know what I mean? Like things just would have not it would not have looked good around here. And that's just kind of the simple reality of it. So we rolled the dice on him for another year, kind of knew there was a good chance he probably wasn't, we probably weren't going to get better in the short term. So, it's kind of one of those, hedge your bets. If he proves that he can do it 2 years in a row, then that trade market going into that winter is nice. And he didn't do it, and that's not some like huge implication on Luis Robert himself. You can only, you know, th- it's been a very up and down career for him, and a lot of it I feel like has to do with injuries more than it does anything else. But when you're trading with other GMs, dude, they're going to use every little bit of that against you in trade leverage. And simply put, that's kind of just how it came off like we were getting. Um, I don't think I don't think it was a serious possibility after probably halfway through 2024 that we were going to be getting a huge return for him unless he turned it around. I think maybe the thought process was maybe he has a great first half and then we maximize that. But that never kind of happened. And it's crazy to me, kind of thinking back to it, like bringing up like when we traded, say, like Dylan Cease, like the fact that Dylan Cease has already played his San Diego Padres like career, and now he's now going to Toronto in the time that we were supposed to trade Luis Robert. It's kind of mind blowing to me. It kind of shows you how quick fast or how fast time goes, but at the same time where all that time where Luis Robert could have taken that next step, it just never quite happened.
Yeah, I think even if he had the 2024 that he did, if he came out last year and repeated 2023, that would have been enough, I think, to have teams write off 24 as the anomaly, as the injury riddled year, and given him, maybe not as much he would have gotten after 23, but given the White Sox, at least a top 100 prospect for him. So there was still time to salvage it, but I agree that he didn't do enough. And I don't really hold resentment toward him over that. Like, I think it was clear that he was still doing everything he could. He actually did have some good stretches last year, even in like June and July, right before his last injury. He was actually playing pretty well and then got hurt, and that was it. So obviously not the tenure any of us were hoping he would have once when we saw him change his Instagram profile picture that one day, like 9 years ago or whatever it was. But it is what it is.
Yeah, I mean, it's just kind of one of those things where it never quite turned around the way it never quite turned around our favor. Because like if you look at 2024 and 2025, like those seasons look nearly identical, like without looking too deep into it. And that's starting to look like the norm compared to the floor. It's starting to look like that might be the ceiling, and that one year was a one-off type situation. And that's just the biggest thing that's the biggest thing that's worked against us this entire time. And it's kind of the entire story of Luis Roberts' career in Chicago is, he had a great comeback in 2021 when we needed him the most to make that playoff push towards the end. Still kind of almost muddled that up, but it worked. And then it was another injury plagued season, 2023, and then two more seasons of, off and on injuries and at times look somewhat uninspiring looking play as well as not producing at the plate. It wasn't a situation where we had this absolute star just basically carrying our team at all times. It was Luis kind of came in and out at different points in the season. Like there'd be weeks, months where you'd usually kind of forget he was in the lineup, but you knew because he was in the lineup, you kind of had a chance that day. Whereas, you think of like, say somebody goes off like a Matt Chapman, like with the A's back in the day. Matt Chapman's gonna hit 38 home runs this year. So like we're gonna have some semblance of offense, whereas like Luis Robert never fully brought that. So it is what it is. But kind of going on to the players that we got. Um, I've seen a lot of negative about Luisangel Acuña. I've seen a lot of positive actually from Mets fans about him. Um, but like to kind of wrap this up right before I get into this point, Nick, and I kind of want you to comment on this too. For this being as like big of a trade as it is, this has to be one of the first times where I've seen White Sox fans basically being the overwhelming negative of this trade, and like the outside media, the other team, and really all their fan bases, like they're not dunking on the White Sox by any sense. It's a situation where it's like a lot of Mets fans feel like it's like, okay, we just bought a lottery ticket. If it hits, awesome. If it doesn't, we kind of expected it and we should have enough of the rest of the lineup to be able to deal with it, but at least we have the glove. And like the national media hasn't come out and said like, oh, the White Sox just gave him away or anything like that. The only conversation it would bring up would be, the White Sox maybe being cheap with the $20 million. But I mean, what are your thoughts on this? Unless you've seen something different, I feel like White Sox fans are the ones that are more upset about this than anything. And this is the first time I've ever seen like, we've lived through the Chris Sale trade. We lived through so many big freaking trades where it did kind of seem like we were handing just this all-star player to somebody, even if we got a good return. Like, what do you like? What do you take of that?
Yeah, I agree. I've seen similar. And I think it's kind of like two camps of White Sox fans right now. And one of them is kind of reacting like, oh, we traded him for that. That's all we got. And the second camp being, well, if that's all we were going to get, I would have rather just kept him into the season and, see if he could rebuild his value, maybe trade him at the deadline if he does. Basically the same plan as last year. And personally, I kind of fall more into that second camp. Like I'm not delusional about his trade value. I know he has not much of it, which is why he got traded for what he did. In large part because of his contract, 20 million being too much for an unreliable player. That being said, had they kept him into the season and he was still, you know, still bad or still injury prone, however you want to phrase it, yeah, you probably wouldn't get much for him at the deadline, if anything. You might have to pay some of his salary down. But I guess the argument would be that's really not that different from what they did get unless you really like Acuna that much, and that's kind of the argument that we haven't had yet. I guess that maybe we should.
Yeah, no, I mean, kind of getting into Acuna a little bit here. So just to get like the two obvious points out of the way. Okay, he's Robert Acuña's brother. He's short. Those are going to be the two things that everyone's going to talk about, like right off the bat. No offense, my short king. Like I don't feel that way, but like those are immediately going to be the two things. They're gonna say, oh, well, Robert Acuna says that his brother's better than him. Oh, well, of course he's gonna say that. That's his brother, that type of thing. Or like, this guy's 5'8". We just traded him for like a sculpted Cuban god. You know what I mean? Like, what are we thinking? So the thing that I really like about Luisangel Acuña's game is like his ability to play anywhere. I wouldn't say that's like his number one feature or anything like that, but he's really solid defensively at both middle infield positions. He spent some time at center field, mostly in the minors and mostly in winter league ball, or before he kind of made the majors. But he does have quite a bit of experience out there. Um, Kid just got unlimited hustle. Like he's just out there genuinely enjoying playing the game without it like affecting his fundamentals. And I feel like that's a huge plus. It's not like an Eloy Jimenez where he's just going to be having a little too much fun out there and just completely forget that there's a wall there or any other dangerous thing. Luis Anel plays a really solid defense, and while the power numbers haven't shown up per se, if you look at his box score numbers, he's not going to look like a guy that's going to just destroy the baseball over the wall. But kid swing is nice. Like if you watch some of his highlights, he's got a really technically sound swing. It's got a lot of power behind it, and it's got a lot of speed behind it. And even with that, he's not just a wild swinger. He's not a guy that's going to go out there and try to, that's going to put up 3 strikeouts a game or anything like that, trying to swing the absolute hell out of the bat. He's patient enough that he can take walks. He's had a little bit of an issue with that at the major league level, but with how slowly the Mets have kind of brought him up, that's natural, I feel like, with a lot of prospects. But there's a lot here. There really is a lot here. This isn't just a throw-in trade. This isn't a Yolecky Cespedes where we're going to be, trying, like hoping that he can just make it out of AA by the age of 28. He's a guy that's probably going to be on the major league roster day one. Wouldn't be surprised if he was starting in center field. That would be a risk, and I feel like there's going to be more a center field signing to come with that. Just because putting him straight into a major league lineup and giving him 162 games worth of at bats probably isn't the way we want to do this. Probably going to want to ease him in a little bit. What I will say is in the winter league right now, he's absolutely mashing the baseball. 282, 397 on base percentage, 542 slugging percentage, 939 OPS. He's got 8 home runs, 32 RBIs in 39 games. It's a little bit of a trend that he goes and plays really well in winter league, but this is a situation where he's going to be able to carry this directly over into spring camp and bring it onto the major league roster compared to what the Mets have essentially done, just basically because there's too many cooks in the kitchen on the New York Mets with how much money they spend, especially middle infield. He's going to have an opportunity to take this right in. It's not going to be, we're going to be sending him to AA or AAA and kind of bring him up when somebody gets injured or somebody's in a slump. This is a situation where he's going to have a full opportunity right off the bat to get an opportunity to play. And it kind of seems like with Chris Getz and the prospects he has brought in, it's been guys that have been on kind of stacked rosters that haven't had that opportunity to play, not because they are not major league ready or major league worthy, just because there's a lot of money tied up at said position. They might have a star at that position. And the Mets do have some depth middle infield as far as their farm system goes as well. I believe Williams, short white kid, he's really good. He's a really good baseball player too. I can't think of his first name right now, but
It's
the
like
Mets, the
Jet or
Mets.
something, I think. Yeah,
What's that?
I think it's Jet,
Yeah, Jet
like
Williams. I
airplane Jet.
should have remembered that. I mean, how do
Yeah,
you forget a first name like Jet? Um,
right.
Oh, and without the risk of going long-winded, like basically just wrap it up is like, I really think if White Sox fans give this kid a chance, to give him an opportunity to show what he can do, what he's, say he struggles with the bat early on, anytime he gets on the base pass, he's got speed, he's got smarts to be able to steal a lot of bases. He's going to be able to cover a lot of ground, even being 5'8". He's got speed. He definitely carried that from. He definitely got that from the family tree, and um, I'm not going to sit here and say the kid's going to hit 30 home runs one day because that's a very, very bold take for me to have. But I think once he's able to kind of get the bat under the ball a little bit in a place like, the south side of Chicago, where it should be a very hitter friendly ballpark, I think there's real potential here.
Yeah, I mean, I hear you on the speed and the versatility and that how that would give him a chance right off the bat. We saw last year how important that was with Brooks Baldwin. He played like what was he started 5 or more games at like 7 positions or something crazy like that. So the White Sox obviously could use somebody like that, especially in the outfield. And I also agree with your point on Getz targeting this type of player. I mean, you could definitely argue that Miguel Vargas, Curtis Mead, even Chase Mydroth, all guys who were in either AAA or the majors and were blocked by other good players already. So that's true. I think where my mind immediately went when we acquired Acuna, it's just by like looking at his profile. And I don't. This is going to come off as an insult, and not to you, to him, and it's really not supposed to be. But it reminds me so much of when we traded Alex Rios for a then 23-year-old or whatever he was to Larry Garcia, and that he's like a short, fast guy who plays every position. And it's oh yeah, I could see this. And to be fair, again, everyone, myself included, I have bad memories of the end of the Garcia tenure, but that was actually a good acquisition. I mean, he played for the White Sox for like 9 years as the utility player. That's you can't really ask for much more than that. I hope he's better. I think he does have more upside, especially with the bat and in terms of this sort of sneaky power that hasn't really shown yet in stateside. But I obviously I've seen what you've seen, and I agree that there's more there. That's just kind of my fear with him is that in the majors so far, again, he's 23, so who knows? But in the majors so far, that power just has not shown up at all. Not even in terms of home runs, but in terms of just consistently hitting the ball in the air, even out of the infield. Most of his hits are infield hits. So I really need to see development in that area, and honestly, pretty soon, given what the White Sox have, coming behind him, at least in the infield. But overall, I can see why anyone would like this player. It's more so that I'm worried that the ceiling, he has a high ceiling, but I'm worried that it's very unlikely to hit because he would just have to start hitting for power the same way he's doing in Venezuela right now. Which who knows? Maybe that happens.
Yeah, I mean it's kind of one of those things where like that's the potential like you could possibly see in him, but when it comes to baseball prospects, really any of them, especially if they're not like a top 10 prospect, we kind of know how this story goes. Some guys hit, most of them don't. Um, and I guess like the biggest positive I would say about being able to get a guy like this, at least that's intriguing, is without a player kind of in this like level where he's at least like somebody to worth paying attention to, worth taking a look at. Um, this trade looks like a $20 million salary dump. And I know that's kind of how Chris Getz has been treated with this so far. Saw a lot of very upset people about that aspect of the trade. But I just see it as a net positive because it could have just been that. It could have just been getting a middle tier prospect, or maybe, instead of getting the two prospects, which I can honestly say I don't know a ton about the pitcher yet. That would definitely be Michael Suero. Definitely listen to his podcast right here on the website. But I I I'm just glad it wasn't just strictly a salary dump, because the White Sox have just notoriously looked terrible in this department. White Sox Dave, everybody was just going nuts on this point about how little our payroll is compared to the rest of the league, especially compared to where we were when we were trying to compete to now, which we were never gonna hit Dodgers money, but we actually were spending money a little bit in that 2021 range. Whereas now, like, the whole idea where we're trying to win every single year and we're just going to have one of the lowest payrolls in baseball is just, come on. Like, what are you trying to actually, you're insulting everybody's intelligence when you do this. But Getz obviously got on the horn. He seemed pretty happy with the trade. And he did bring up the fact that that $20 million would be spent, or it kind of opens up flexibility for it to be spent, and that the White Sox are not done. What are your thoughts? I mean, I feel like feel like outfield has to be a position of priority now, even with my love of Luisangel Acuña, which is going to be just overwhelming. But we need to be serious about day one, having somebody who's serious in case this kid completely flames out right off the bat and maybe needs to go down for more seasoning. How do you feel about um Getz's comments, I guess, to kind of wrap her up?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely to the point you were making, it's definitely frustrating that you need to trade Luis Robert in order to make more additions when you already have such a low payroll. But that aside, in terms of what this team needs, I mean, outfield for sure. The problem with outfield is that there really aren't many. Not even talking about the budget, but just in general, there aren't many good outfielders out there. The options the White Sox have are like Conforto, Talkman, Bader, Hayes, and all those guys for various reasons have their limitations. Whether it's because they're not very good at the plate, like or lately I should say, whether because they're not center fielders, only corner, or for someone like Bader where he can play center pretty well, but he had what, in my opinion, was a pretty fluky offensive year that I don't think he's gonna be able to repeat, which makes me think we're going to sign him, honestly. But that's another discussion. Outfield for sure. Starting pitching too, you would think they'd want to sign one more pitcher who they can rely on for eating innings. Basically, you can never have too many of those. I've seen the name Griffin Canning thrown out a lot, and I do like him, but I think the problem with that idea is that he is recovering from injury and probably won't be ready until like June, maybe even July. And I think the White Sox are going to have several pitchers of the Schultz and Smith and McDougal variety that will probably be up in the majors around, June or July themselves. So I don't know how much. Obviously, we're going to need innings in April and May, and ideally the whole season. But I don't know if it makes sense to sign somebody who can't start in the beginning of the season, which is when you're more likely to need those innings. Because you would assume most of those AA and AAA guys are going to start in the minors and work their way up if they perform well. So where do they need to spend this money? I mean, I don't know if they'll spend all 20 million of it, but my guess would be an outfielder, a starting pitcher, and if there's any left, then spread it out amongst the relievers. But I don't have like a player that I really want them to sign in large part because this market, like I was saying, there's really just nobody out there right now that is a perfect fit that the White Sox could really use. It's more so just they need outfielders, they need warm bodies out there, so they've got to do something.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and just the most convenient timing in the world once like most of the, top free agents are already off the market. So the
Right.
White Sox can't even like, play the oh, we're gonna try to be right there with all the other teams with some of these big boys. It's like, yeah, no. It almost just feels conveniently timed where it's like, yeah, let's get all the expensive guys off the market and then let's make this trade open up the money and be like, oh yeah, we're willing to spend now. um I have seen the Michael Conforto rumors. That would be like the most like we would have to start the new meme of like Getz always gets his guy if that were to happen. Cause like, come on. That's a signing that should have happened years ago. I mean, I know Jordan Lazowski has very strong feelings about that. It's unfortunate I couldn't clown on him a little bit for that, but it feels like that's the type of like area we're gonna go. Who knows? Maybe there is a player that Chris Getz saw at one of those games in Japan and just decides that like that's my guy. That's my next Tadahito Oguchi. It probably won't be, but we like to pretend around here. I don't know. I mean, overall, like I'm in that point of the off season where I want to get to spring training. I want the pitchers and catchers report already because I have no expectations about like what we're gonna do here moving forward. I really wasn't expecting Luis Robert trade at this time, especially considering we just picked up his option. So your guess is as good as mine, Nick. I really have no idea who we're gonna sign. I just know areas of need are definitely the outfield. Um, like you said, I wouldn't mind us spending a little bit more money as far as relievers go, um, just because we have the money to spend. And, it's obvious we're young at so many other positions. And at least some good relievers would at least help us stay in close games, instead of basically, say a young starter has a really good game and then we just hand it over and give up, 7 runs, as awesome as that's been to watch on a year to year basis. So I really I don't have a great guess. So, but I think this episode was important though. I think it was more therapeutic. Um, so before we get out of here, Nick, give me your favorite Luis Robert moment.
For me, it's going to have to be in his rookie year, the home run he hit in the playoffs against the A's. It was like 487 feet. It was a do or die, like win or go home game to put the White Sox up. Don't talk to me about how the rest of that game went, but that was just a truly electric moment and a huge, like, I've arrived kind of moment from him since he was still a rookie.
I would say my favorite, it would have been it would have been on Apple TV because I remember having to download it onto my TV before we watched the game, and it was against the Boston Red Sox, and it was him hitting an absolute missile over the Green Monster. It was in 2023. It was when he was like kind of really starting to pick up steam into having this breakout season, and being able to see it on a national-ish audience with all the Apple analytics that are on the screen at all times when you watch one of their broadcasts. It was pretty cool. I much as I hate to sound um uh like a trendy person, that's the word I'm looking for. As much as I hate to look like a trendy person and fall into the trap of loving everything on the Apple freaking broadcast, it all coming together to watch him hit one over the Green Monster was pretty freaking cool. So I'll take it. So, but overall, I mean, shout out to Luis Robert. There were some good memories here. I saw a really cool story on Twitter earlier about this guy going on a first date with his current fiance, and that them catching a Luis Robert home run ball on their first date. So like the stuff like that's always going to be cool. Um, he was a guy that like every time it felt like he wasn't showing enough effort, he would have like just a 5 game tear just to basically like remind you all that like no, I actually do care. It's just I'm fucking having a hell of a time right now. And yeah, I mean, overall, I have nothing but positive things to say about Luis Robert, and I think it's great that he's going to a team on the Mets. He's going to be able to play in the same outfield as freaking Soto, which is awesome in a sense. Like that has the potential to be just like one of the cooler combos in baseball as far as a lineup pairing goes. So I wish him the best. I'm hoping for Luisangel Acuña, but I will control myself from buying that jersey until the time comes.
Yeah, well put.
But I think that's a good point to get us out of here, Nick. Ladies and gentlemen, that's all we have this week for the Sox on 35th emergency podcast. Not an official podcast. It's an emergency podcast. I want everyone to remember that. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, and anywhere else you get your podcasts. Also, be sure to check out the website, soxon35th.com, as well as following us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Sox on 35th to stay up to date with your Chicago White Sox. Remember to use code SOXON35th for $20 off your first purchase with SeatGeek. This has been Duke Coughlin, joined by Nik Gaur. We'll be back soon for another great, potentially historical episode of White Sox baseball. Thank you, and go Sox.
Go Sox.